What's up, sports fans? My name is lukasweese, host of the Weesesports Chronicles podcast. And on Sunday, we have a special guest. She is Rahef Issa, one of the leading voices of Toronto Maple Leafs Twitter and a rising star in hockey analytics and statistics. Rahef and I have a wide-ranging conversation about how she got into loving analytics and statistics in hockey, her approach to using social media to post some of her findings that she's discovered through her education and knowledge of hockey analytics and statistics, how the game has taken so long to embrace new underlying figures to evaluate players and teams. And then we dive into supporting women in sports and the importance of giving women a platform in this space of hockey statistics and analytics to communicate their findings and to use their voice to share some important perspectives. So a really fantastic conversation with Rahef on this Weesports Chronicles podcast. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. The Weesports Chronicles podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. So make sure to like, rate, watch, and subscribe to all three of those channels. Now let's get to today's episode with Rahef Issa on the Weesports Chronicles podcast. All right, as I said off the top, if you have been involved with Leafs Twitter, if you know about the Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm sure you've seen Rahef Issa. She's one of the real compelling, passionate voices on Leafs Twitter, but she's also one of the brightest young minds when it comes to hockey analytics. So I'm pleased to have Rahef join me today on the Weesports Chronicles podcast. Rahef, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
What an introduction. Thanks so much for having me, Lucas.
Well, listen, I mean, it's all true. It's certainly well deserved. And we'll get into sort of your analytics background in a bit, but Toronto Maple Leafs, had a roller coaster of a season, as we all know. But Kyle Dubas, general manager of the Leafs, said, we're going to make some changes. And they did make changes. I'm just curious from your perspective, your thoughts as this team is about to embark on next season, what it looks like. Because from my perspective, I sort of like the changes that they've made, personally.
I agree. I think that while there may have been a little bit of questionable changes, pointing specifically towards Zach Bogosian,
yeah.
But I really do agree with the Joe Thornton signing. That was incredible. That's going to be a really fun signing. Whether he plays third center or fourth line center, it'll be really interesting. And I think the Wayne Simmonds signing was also a good pickup.
Mm-hmm.
He's a good goal scorer. He plays the second unit power play. It'll be very interesting. So I think that the changes sort of signal maybe a little bit of a shift in Kyle Dubas and Brendan Shanahan's, mind and possibly ideology when it comes to how to build a winning team. So I think that shift is the most interesting. And it'll be exciting to see, what he does at the deadline now that there's, some cap space, no LTIR. So that'll be interesting as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key going into the offseason, I know there were a lot of questions about the team's ability to perform, whether this team has sandpaper, grit, all those, overused terms. But I think they've done a good job with that. And you mentioned the Wayne Simmonds signing, the Joe Thornton signing, bringing that real veteran experience in the locker room to complement the young stars on the team. But also TJ Brodie. I mean, look, TJ Brodie, huge upgrade over Cody Ceci. Am I right? I think, the amount of sleepless nights I had, Cody Ceci making turnovers, it'll certainly, improve that defense.
Unquestionably. And he's even an upgrade for me, at least, in Tyson Barrie as well. So I think that it was an excellent move to bring TJ Brodie in. I think he's low risk, and he's sort of exactly what the Leafs need. He's good at the thing the Leafs are not spectacularly good at, which is defense. So it'll be good to have, a player sort of similar to Jake Muzzin.
Yeah.
You can never have enough Jake Muzzins, in my opinion. So I think that was a great pickup by Kyle Dubas. Everybody was talking about how he needs to do something to improve the defense. And it really is hard, especially in free agency, to find, that perfect defenseman. But I think TJ Brodie was about as good as he could have gotten. excellent pickup.
Yeah, and like I mean, obviously, like the top person would have been Alex Pietrangelo, but just in terms of the money situation, I mean, the Leafs just probably couldn't afford to make that sort of a decision. But I think getting a guy like Brody will certainly enhance that blue line. But look, Raph, I mean, there isn't really a lot of, right now it's still TBD in terms of what next season will look like and whatnot. But the rumor of an all-Canadian division, that to me is so compelling because obviously we got Leafs Habs and Leafs Senators, but to see Austin Matthews going up against Elias Pettersson, like, inject that into my veins because that's just going to be awesome.
Especially that Vancouver Canucks team. Those would be fun matchups. Even Edmonton, I think, the McDavid Draisaitl versus, Marner, Tavares, Matthews. I think it'll be really, really fun. And also those fan bases. I mean, the Leafs, Leaf fans and Edmonton fans and Canucks fans, vice versa, but they all hate each other.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be really fun. Make for some excellent storylines.
No kidding. And also great nights on Twitter when those two teams go at it. But Ref, what would you say, like, for, when you look at the Leafs heading into this season, I feel like this is sort of like a big inflection point year for the team. Like, they haven't gotten past the first round. This is sort of the make or break year for Kyle Dubas and whatnot. What would you say are some of the biggest questions going into this year about this team and whether they can perform ahead of expectations?
I think a big question for me is how Freddie performs.
Yeah.
How the goaltending holds up, because I know that was a huge issue and a storyline last season. Probably one of the main reasons why maybe the regular season did not go as planned. The goaltending was just not there throughout the majority of the season, especially after, November and late December. So I feel like that will be a huge something I'm really trying to pay attention to see how, not only how Freddie does, but, how many games is he going to play? Will he split games with Jack Campbell now that there's a better backup instead of Michael Hutchinson, who the Leafs actually reacquired? Like, that's hilarious. Yeah, so that's, I think, something I'll be paying attention to closely, because I think a lot of the narratives that we talked about last season, I think when you dive into the numbers, they can be explained, pretty clearly in terms of, how bad the goaltending was for a major portion of the season. So I think that'll be, something I'll be paying attention to.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's so 2020 when Michael Hutchinson is playing elimination playoff games after he just continued to break the hearts of Leafs fans across Canada, because, boy, that was hard to watch at times, but it's really interesting to see that he'll be sort of competing with the Marlies. But yeah, I mean, and look, I mean, Austin Matthews, to me, got robbed of that 50-goal season. He was on pace to get that, so I think he's, going to continue that upward trend. But I'm really interested in looking at how Mitch Marner responds, because, I mean, I love Mitch watching him on the ice. His skating ability is off the charts, but I feel like, the whole contract discussion maybe got him, in a bit of a, just out of sorts. And while he did play, have a good season, I feel like Leafs fans are just waiting for him to say, okay, like, he's got to be worth that $10 million a year.
Yeah, here's the thing with that, though. I think that we can all agree that, he might have gotten just a tad bit overpaid. Mm-hmm. I think what that's done is that it sets the bar maybe a little bit too high for Mitch Marner. And like you said, he's an incredible player. Like, I would not want him on any other team, except the Leafs. But I think paying him that $10.9, I think it was, $1 million a year, it kind of does set the bar quite high for him. Now, I think he did have a good season last year, but I do think that he can be better. I don't know if he will be $11 million better, but I do think that he can provide even more than what he did last season. So that'll be interesting, and I wonder who Sheldon Keefe will play him beside, whether that'll be Tavares or Matthews. I mean, the fact that we're even having that conversation is pretty cool, because he plays excellently with either center. But yeah, I think that'll be also pretty interesting.
Rahef, I mean, I remember the days of like Bates Battaglia, Kyle Wellwood, Aki Berg. So like when you mention those names, like that just brings music to my ears, because there were some painful Leaf years.
Yeah, I remember. I think somebody posted the other day William Nylander's first game, and they posted the roster. I think this would have been the tank year, so 2015, and that P.A. Parento was playing like significant minutes on this league team at the time. So yeah, things have changed for sure.
I want to pivot to talk about your background and passion with hockey analytics, because anyone that follows your Twitter account knows that you have a real deep and growing knowledge in this category. And I'm just curious, Rahef, like what got you into sort of wanting to pursue and learn more about data and analytics when it comes to hockey?
Well, I think actually it may have been like a mixing of two worlds for me, because it definitely came from school as I started to learn more about statistics, modeling, things like that. That caught my attention pretty clearly in school. And then the other thing was I've always had a passion for hockey. So then when I, started to get involved in hockey Twitter, and I saw that there was this whole world of like two things that I love, hockey and statistics, I was like, this is like the perfect thing for me, my calling card, I guess you could say. So that was kind of how it started for me. And then my school offers some pretty cool courses and programs. There's a course where it was literally just for analytics. So I got to even like delve more in to see if I would love it more than I already thought that I did. And I did. And so it's kind of just kept me pushing in that direction at this point. And that's kind of where it all started for me.
So a U of T Rotman student not taking consulting or accounting, or finance. What world is this, Rahef?
I know.
but in all seriousness, obviously analytics has been a topic in sports now for quite some time. Anyone that's watched Moneyball knows, it's been very popular in baseball. Now starting to gain a lot more steam in hockey. Where would you recommend someone starting? What if you just said, okay, Lucas, I want you to get started on learning analytics. How does that just happen? Because I'm sure it must take a lot of, reading, repetition, and just constantly just digging deep into the numbers to really understand what this is all about.
Actually, that's a great question, because one of the most amazing things about hockey analytics and the entire community is that it's extremely, in my opinion, accessible.
Yeah.
For me, at least, part of the reason why I got extremely interested or involved is because there was already this huge community on Twitter, and there's so many amazing people who do a lot of work, and it's all public. And so it really gives you an opportunity to learn on your own in a way that's fun. While the games are happening, you can check and follow all of these different websites, different people who are posting all of their work to the public. That's another way that I really got very interested, just because everything is public. Another really cool thing is that hockey still has, like you said, quite a ways to go with relation to, say, baseball or even basketball and soccer. And so that's a really exciting thing. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of work that, still needs to be done, a lot of research that can still happen. And so hockey, the sport analytics community in hockey is still growing. And I think that's really, really fascinating. But I would honestly point to joining the hockey analytics community on Twitter. I think it's an excellent place. And I know that there's sometimes a reputation for a lot of the people who are involved in the community sometimes to be a little condescending or snotty. And I understand where that comes from sometimes. But I think when you get involved, there's a lot of really great people, and it's an amazing opportunity to learn so much. So I would point honestly to joining the hockey analytics Twitter.
Great answer. I'm going to unpack a couple things from that because there's a lot of really great stuff in there. So you mentioned how a lot of this is public. So then how do you then stand out? Because there's a lot of this information. How do you sort of, make it so that you sort of are different than the rest of the people that are already established in that community?
Well, I think, like I said, there's so many avenues for questions in hockey that we still don't have the answers to with regards to analytics. I mean, actually, just a few days ago, someone who's involved in the hockey analytics Twitter, released a super interesting research topic discussion point, where he was sort of rehashing things that maybe we had already discussed a few years ago. But bringing it back to light, the conversation was about. Sorry, I'm gonna get into some analytics here.
No, it's all good.
It was
Please.
about the predictiveness of expected goals versus Corsi. Corsi was sort of what started.
Yeah.
The analytics explosion in hockey, I would say, which is basically, for any of your listeners who aren't aware of what Corsi is, it's essentially just shot attempts.
Yeah.
So it's a measure for shot attempts. And then there's a new metric that's been, I wouldn't say very recent, but pretty recent, in expected goals. Now, a lot of people have started to use expected goals as a way to predict future team performance. And Dread Like Pool had a really great article about how maybe actually the thing we were doing in the first place, Corsi, might be more predictive than expected goals. So I think there's a lot of work and a lot of things that can be done. And maybe it's not so much about standing out per se, maybe just asking some questions that, even if they have been asked before, but maybe presenting that information in a new way or a new light, I think is really good.
Just digging a little deeper with the whole Corsi and then expected goals, maybe just walk through for my listeners how Corsi then evolved into expected goals and sort of then where you could maybe see expected goals maybe potentially evolving into, or do you think that's sort of the peak understanding right now of that particular evaluative metric?
So I think that the way that expected goals sort of came about is a lot of people started asking, okay, so we have this Corsi thing, it measures shot attempts, but naturally the next thing you do is you ask questions. So, what about shot location? What about shot angle? What about the type of shot? And so expected goals is a model that incorporates all of those different factors into one measure. And so it allows you to consider all of those things, like what would be the predictability of a shot taken from the slot? Like, do we think that's going to result in a goal more than, say, a shot from the point? Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of what expected goals measures, because we have an idea that not all shots are equal, obviously, in hockey. And so it attempts to sort of control for all of those different things. That's sort of how expected goals evolved from Corsi. But it's been really interesting to go back to the root of that discussion and sort of ask, what is the better metric for predicting future goals and future wins? So I think that's sort of an interesting conversation that's happening right now.
No, and it's really interesting because you mentioned how in that answer, it's a lot about just asking questions. And that's what people in sports media do all the time. I mean, we ask questions of players, coaches, and whatnot for stories, but the whole concept of analytics is just asking questions and using that as a tool to inform decision making on player evaluation, matchups. And I think that there's a lot more, there's a lot of great voices right now in hockey, Twitter, hockey media that are really doing a good job balancing the two, because I think it can be a lot of numbers, it can be a lot of stuff, but if you could provide context to what those numbers and metrics mean, it can then lead to a really thoughtful discussion.
Exactly right. And that's sort of like the analysis side.
Mm-hmm.
Not everything necessarily is about building the models themselves, right? Sometimes it really just takes, you can get 5 different people looking at the same thing, and, all 5 of them will give you a different analysis or a different picture of what they're looking at. And I think that's a really important thing. Like you said, it's just about asking questions.
So are you interested, Rahef, more in the modeling, or are you more interested in the analysis, or are you just, kind of doing a bit of both?
I'm sort of feeling it out right now.
Okay.
I think that I'm more interested in the analysis part than maybe I would be in the data modeling. I'm going to be honest, my coding is not necessarily up to data modeling levels, although I think if I worked hard, I could probably bring it up to that. But right now, I'm sort of at the analysis level. But it is sort of what I enjoy more, because I also love the sport, not just the modeling aspect. It gives you an opportunity to talk about things that, analysis, giving context to situations and stuff like that. So I enjoy doing that as well.
No, and I think that's what separates people like yourself and others in sort of the hockey analytics community is look, you're watching a game in a very different way. And I think you can sort of see, and look, there's different people that have different, ways to approach it. Some people are more just the play-by-play. Here's, Nylander scores, Matthews scores, saved by Anderson, things like that. But I think it's combine that with then like looking at the hockey analytics as you're watching, it's like an explosion of knowledge that is just so cool to just follow Twitter. It's why I have TweetDeck during hockey season, because I just need to like see all what's going on with the different Twitter accounts to see all the knowledge that's being presented.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of, when it comes to watching the game, there's a lot of different questions that we can ask, to understand and how analytics can help us understand what's happening in the game. Because it tells you how something happens in a way, sort of. Not necessarily, when you see a player score a goal, it's sort of like, how did that happen? So analytics can help build that picture in addition to, your eyes, right? Because there's always this argument about, leaning too hard in one direction. I think it's sort of a silly discussion because obviously you're going to use both. You supplement what you see with your eyes with the numbers, because together it all just gives you more detail of what's happening on the ice. It paints a better picture.
Yeah, I mean, that's like sort of my, like, it's one of my biggest pet peeves with sports right now, is just like how, like, and it happened in the World Series with Kevin Cash removing Blake Snell, and it led to this like referendum on analytics when like, and people need to like sort of, if you calm down for a second and say like, look, analytics isn't going away. It's here to stay. But I think the problem is, it's like, the pro eye test people are just looking for anything to like poke into the analytics and say, there you go, it's not working, analytics sucks. And then like maybe some people from analytics are like, like eye tests, like where are those people? But like, I just think we need to use both and have a balance, because it's it can lead to quite toxic conversations pretty quickly.
I agree. Yeah, I definitely think that there needs to be a balance. And I think it's interesting how, people will point to one game as a show that, analytics doesn't work. Of course, I'm not very familiar with what happened during the World Series, but I do remember seeing something on my timeline about this. And I think that I would point to, say, the 100 whatever plus games that they have played in the season and say, well, it looks like analytics worked, or it was painting an accurate picture in this time frame. So I think that's the problem sort of a lot of people have, is that understanding that analytics in general isn't going to be 100% accurate all of the time. I think this happens a lot with like predictive modeling a lot of times. I know Dom Lucian posts a lot of like, he predicts a lot of like player results, team results, and sometimes people they get upset when what actually happens isn't what he predicted. But of course, it's just, probability, right? Likelihood. And so that's why we use it as a tool. It's not necessarily the be-all, end-all at all times. But I do think that if you're not using analytics to understand what's happening in the game, then I really think that you're missing 50% of the picture.
So I'm gonna use a player that is dear to your heart, William Nylander, because I think he's like the perfect example of why, like, of just sort of the analytics say one thing that, like, he has the great underlying numbers, and even the eye test to a degree. But I just think, like, I mean, I hear my dad every time, like, trade William Nylander. I'm like, okay, like, relax, it's not happening. Can you, like, sort of, like, to the listeners who may be, like, questioning still William Nylander, like, why is he, like, better than maybe sometimes, like, the eye test shows?
I think that William Nylander, like you said, very controversial player, even though when you really look at his body of work, he should not be a controversial player. Because in my opinion, even the eye test shows William Nylander as an exceptional player. I mean, have you watched him carry the puck from the defensive zone to the offensive zone? He's like a neutral zone wizard. And the thing is all of those things are important, but I think what happens with William Nylander is a lot of people want him to be something that he's not. And they want him to be, the big power forward that will, hit you and knock you on your butt and then steal the puck. And he's not like that, as we all know. But he is effective. Even last year when he scored 30 goals, the majority of those goals were from in front of the net. He has a knack for making space for himself. And I think that just because he plays a different style, like I said, he's more smooth. Everything he does looks effortless. So you don't necessarily notice him trying very hard because it seems like it's easy to him, the skating. He skates so effortlessly. He can move around guys very efficiently, especially in the neutral zone. And so I think that a lot of people are sort of watching him expecting one thing, and then from like preconceived biases and, you know, all sorts of things I'm not going to get into right now.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, people have a picture of what they want him to be. And so when he doesn't skate like that or, you know, hit somebody like that or he avoids to block a shot or something like that, it sort of just reinforces people's biases that they already have. But I think one of the great things about analytics is that during his season when the results were not there, that shortened season when he didn't have a contract and then he came back and he had missed a lot of time and the results were not there for him, especially towards the last few months of the season. His analytics were like very, very good. And you could see that he was doing all the right things. It was just an incredible case of horrible, horrible luck. And so I think that that's what analytics helped cement William Nylander, that he was not, you know, all of a sudden a changed player just because he wasn't scoring goals or racking up as many points or assists, because you could see that the process was there. He was doing all the right things. And so then he came back next season and, you know, we saw what we saw, 30 goals. He had an incredible season. And so, yeah, I think that William Nylander is definitely a case study for analytics. He's actually similar to another player. I would compare him to Nick Ehlers.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people in Winnipeg have very similar conversations comparing Nick Ehlers maybe to Kyle Connor, even Patrick Laine. But yeah, I think they're both similar players, and they receive the same vitriol from certain segments of the fan base.
Tune into the after hours of the Weesports Chronicles to hear Rahef talk about the biases against William Nylander. But in all seriousness, you know, you mentioned how, I mean, analytics, it's just a tool, and some of the, you know, maybe the drawbacks of the predictive model, and it's very accurate. But where would you say right now, and you mentioned it a bit earlier, like in terms of the questions right now that are being really talked about in the hockey analytics community, and do you think, like, and how quickly do you think we'll sort of see maybe an answer to this? Because I guess it, you know, really depends. You know, you need the data to support it, but, you know, what are some of the questions right now being talked about?
I think that the analytics community is going to explode very soon with the introduction of player puck tracking. So I think there's going to be so much opportunity to learn and understand, you know, what we see on the ice and to answer some of those questions that we maybe don't have, like you said, the data to answer right now. So I think that, you know, introducing player and puck tracking is going to be huge. And like you said, something that the NHL maybe lacks compared to other sports like baseball and basketball is, you know, this lack of data, that we don't necessarily have the opportunity to answer a lot of questions, sort of based on the fact that there is no player and puck tracking. So with that coming in, I think there's, you know, you're going to see teams expanding their research departments. They're going to have to. There's going to be such an influx of data. Without, you know, a bigger team, it's going to be impossible to sort through all of it. So I think that it's going to be really exciting. There's going to be a lot of new work being done very soon. As soon as we get that, hopefully very soon, you know, Batman keeps pushing it back and back. And, you know, with COVID, it's a whole other story. But as soon as we get that, I think there's going to be lots of cool things happening.
You mentioned earlier about, you know, joining the hockey analytics community on Twitter to really get an insight and to build that brand if that's what you're interested in. When did you sort of, you know, quote unquote take off, just in terms of like get more people looking at your work? Because look, I mean, anyone that starts a Twitter account, like, it's very rare for that first tweet to go viral. Like, you need to sort of demonstrate, you know, that you're willing to put time into investing into building that brand. So like, what was there a particular tweet? Was it like a heat chart? Like, what was it for you, Rahef, that like got you on the analytics map?
I don't really know if there was any one thing, to be honest. I think that I was just super involved in the community. I was counting a lot of people
nice
that were there. And yeah, and I think it just sort of happened. I think I was maybe one of the people who was sort of championing William Nylander during that period when he wasn't really necessarily putting up the results. And so I think that that sort of lent itself more to, a certain segment of people in hockey Twitter. So I think that was maybe the beginning of it for me. Yeah, I can't really pinpoint like one thing, honestly.
Yeah, well, I mean, I say this all the time because I mean, many of my listeners are, young sports journalists, getting into the industry, and it takes time, right? Like, and it's very rare for, unless you do have a viral tweet, like it does take time, and it sort of takes a real investment. I know for me, like back in my university days, like I had like 200 followers because I didn't really put a lot of time in, and then like once you put more time in, people then will start to notice you, and it's a combination of a lot of things. And I think what's difficult about social media following and branding is like there's no real silver bullet, right? Like everyone is different, but I think if you put in the time and you really show what you know, right? Like I think you don't want to, I think that's also really important as well to sort of gain credibility and authority in that space.
And I think a really important thing is you can't be afraid to sort of mess up or say the wrong thing or, say something that might be wrong, because I think that's a great way to learn. And I definitely did that a lot of times where people would correct me or, give me different ideas or different like things to think about. And so I think the scariest part is sort of putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
Sort of, getting or allowing yourself to maybe be wrong is sort of like a big thing.
No, I mean, like that's such a great point. And I know that for you, you're, in addition to hockey analytics, I mean, you're one of the, my favorite follows on Twitter to just really support women in sports. And I think like this year especially has been very important to really remind that, because I think, having those voices are so important, and especially in hockey analytics where, definitely, male dominated space. So I'm just curious for you how you sort of see your role, and I know you're just starting out, but you've seen your role as sort of a mentor to people, in the, to women in the hockey analytics space.
Well, it'd be crazy for anybody to look up to me. That's incredible, but I think that's a good point. I sort of feel like hockey's having maybe like a reckoning right now.
Yeah.
In terms of diversity and sort of all aspects, whether that be gender, whether that be race, sexuality, religion, all sorts of things. And so I think people are asking a lot of questions about how we can make not just the analytics community, but hockey in the broader sense, a more inclusive environment for people, especially like you said, women, where there definitely are not enough women in in hockey and in hockey analytics for sure. And so I think that a lot of people right now are starting to ask the right questions and starting to figure out, how can we get women more involved? How can we, make a pathway for women who maybe, always wanted to be involved in sports or, journalism or all these things regarding sports, but, have always looked up and seen maybe not themselves. And so they haven't really thought that there would be an opportunity. And so I think that there are a lot of teams right now trying to figure out what they can do and how to make the sport a more inclusive place. There's a really good person on Twitter I'd recommend your listeners to follow. It would be the Black Girl Hockey Club.
Yep. She's
doing a lot of excellent, the founder, Renee, she's doing a lot of incredible work in trying to make hockey a more inclusive place for women, especially women of color. And so I think that's a great resource for people if they want to look into that. And yeah, I definitely think that there's a lot of work to do, but I also think that's exciting because that means that, there's a lot of space and a lot of room for more people to get involved.
No, that's a great answer. And I think you're absolutely right that hockey's sort of undergoing this reckoning right now. And I think social media's been, it can be both sides. Like, I mean, what women in sports have to deal with on a daily basis is just, flat out disturbing. And it's, still happening in 2020, sadly. But I think it's, that awareness is being called out more. It's being written about the fact that there aren't enough women on radio stations in Toronto. There aren't enough women, occupying analytics positions on hockey teams, things like that. And like, I think not only being an inspiration to women, you also got to call out the men here as well. And I think like that's, what I'm trying to do with my podcast, getting female voices on the show, really ensuring that, because we need to sort of break down those norms that have just been sort of carried on through generations and generations. And I think that will then lead to, hopefully, employers, teams, media companies, being more open to diversity, being more open to getting women of color, people of color on their shows and on their content. So I think that's also important as well. And yeah, because, it needs to happen to get more voices in the space.
Yeah, it's like, how can we get to a place where, when a woman makes a mistake in sports reporting, sport analytics, whatever, we can deem it as just a mistake.
Yeah.
And not sort of what we see now, which is like a referendum
Yeah.
on like the entire person's knowledge or like understanding of their work or their line of work. So I think that, that should be our goal.
Last question for you, Rahef, and I ask this for a lot of my guests. Do you have a favorite Maple Leafs game that comes up to your mind as like, great for the analytics, or just great because it was just an awesome game? I mean, I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that's a good question. I think that last season there's definitely a few awesome games. Obviously, the answer that a lot of people probably would say is that the crazy Carolina game, where Mitch Marner had like the night of his life, that was insane. But I'm actually gonna say the last hockey game that I went to, and actually the last game that the Leafs played in the regular season before the season had to be shut down, which is their 2-1 win against, I think it was 3-1 against Tampa Bay. That was a great game, both in analytics and just in general. It was super fun. And also I was there, so that was like a really good time for me the last time I went to a game. So that was probably my favorite Leafs game this season.
Okay, I lied, because this is now a follow-up to that last question. How weird was that experience? Because the sports world shut down like a few days later.
It was so weird. I actually won the ticket.
Oh, nice.
And part of the package that I won was I was supposed to be able to go to the press conference that happens with the players after the game, right? And I was also supposed to be able to, when the players are walking out inside of the arena still, you know how they high five people? Yeah, I was supposed to be there and be able to high five them. Yeah. But because of COVID, last second all the rules changed, so we were actually not allowed to attend the press conference anymore, and we were not allowed to obviously go near the players. So that changed. Honestly, it changed last minute. So I'm not sure. When you think back to that period, it's kind of crazy how everything happened so quickly. It's one day they were playing games in an arena filled with 22,000 people, and then the next there's no sports. It was very quick. So yeah, it is crazy how so much has changed since then.
No kidding. Well, while we have fingers crossed that when it's safe to do so and fans can come back in Scotiabank Arena, that you'll have that opportunity to fist bump one of your favorites, maybe William Nylander for all the followers there. But listen, Rahef Issa is one of the really bright young minds of hockey analytics. Please follow her on Twitter and support her work. She does amazing stuff. Rahef, thank you so much for joining me today on the Weesports Chronicles podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.